The following video is sponsored by the Greek American Heritage Society of Philadelphia.
Forced deportations. They did not know why. Forced to walk without food, without water. Forced to walk from where they once dwelled. They could not hide. Forced to walk without shelter. Forced to walk into scorching sun, malarial swamps, and biting snow. They agonized until they died. Forced deportations of fathers, mothers, all. Forced to walk till their footprints vanished.
Tell us about the poem.
I'll tell you from the intro of my poem that'll explain it. The Turkish government covered up 28 years of the deliberate and systematic extermination of the original Christian inhabitants of Asia Minor by euphemistically naming death marches as deportations.
Wow, that's very powerful. Tell us about yourself.
I was born in New York City at the Bellevue Hospital, which is important because I later found out a lot of Armenian girls were trained to be nurses, and a lot of them were hired by Bellevue Hospital, and who knows, I might have been one of the little babies they took care of back then. Anyhow, my dad and my mother were born in Greece, on the Greek island of Evia, and my husband, my first husband, was born in New York, but his family was from Asia Minor, from the city of Cappadocia, or Cappadocia, however it's pronounced, Cappadocia. It has several pronunciations. From that point on, my dad died when I was little, unfortunately. I was blessed to have this wonderful human being who was my spiritual father be part of my life. And then I later came to, with my husband, we moved to Texas where he went to law school. And from law school, we moved back to New York, and we were going to settle in with the family. And eventually we wound up going to New Jersey, where we lived in Cinnaminson for at least 10 years. And then from there, after the end of my marriage.
There's something interesting. I think you mentioned briefly about Cinnaminson and your husband. There's an association there.
Yes. In Cinnaminson, there were a few things that happened that were really terrific. One is that my husband eventually founded the Cinnaminson Public Library, which I'm very proud of. I also used to organize home tours, Christmas home tours, every Christmas, of course. And the monies went to the poorer families that needed help with the heating bill.
Let's go on about your life in Cinnaminson. You had 2 children there?
Not there, but no? Before that. Okay. I have 2 sons. Yes. And they, of course, now grown men. The younger one, they're both, by the way, they don't speak Greek because, sadly, I listened to them when they said, "Mom, don't talk Greek to us in front of our friends." And we lost the language along the way, but
you speak Greek.
I speak Greek, yes, but I wish they did too. But they do know words, but they have a great love for Greek. Anything that is Greek, and therefore I'm very proud to say my older son knows, he's a walking encyclopedia about Greek history, and my other son is a walking encyclopedia about Greek writers. One of the things that my younger son, Dean Kostos, who is known by many Greeks in New York City, and Americans and non-Americans, is he founded and directed the Greek American Writers Association for 20 years. Just 2 months ago, he handed over the helm to Penelope Karageorge, another great poet.
So tell us more about your life from Cinnaminson into the Philadelphia area and your involvement with the arts?
Okay, well, as I evolved and my life evolved, I became very involved in sculpture. I loved to sculpt. I studied under many great sculptors for a period of 8 years, actually. 6 over at the at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and then 2 years at the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts. And because of my sculpting background, I don't see things and I don't think of things in the flat. It's part of the discipline. One has to think in terms of looking around from all angles, and then from the top down to the bottom, whatever makes the piece exciting to look at and to want to look at. And this has affected my work, my poetry, my other works. Yes.
Let's talk about your other works. You've put together a book just a few years ago.
Yes. It was a book that was born out of my ignorance. And my ignorance is what prompted, I never knew it was going to happen that way, but I went to a special event in Washington, D.C., commemorating the anniversary of, I forget now which anniversary, I think 75th anniversary of the genocides of the Greeks, the Armenians, and the Assyrians. And I went there because my son had been asked to read his epic poem called Despina's Rug about his grandparents. And up to that point, I never wanted to know anything about genocides. He would say, "Mom, I'm working on a poem." I said, "I don't want to know about it." Only because I had a Jewish neighbor who used to tell me her stories. And they were so horrifying and so painful that after that, I never wanted to know about genocides. Consequently, now I'm there that day and I learn about it and I'm furious with myself and my ignorance. And I met this gentleman who is now my friend, Vasilis Theodosakis. And I said to him, "Please write down the names of books so I can read them." And he said, "They don't exist anymore. These books are gone." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They're not allowed to be reprinted, and any book that still exists is very expensive." Well, one thing he didn't know about me is I have a will, tremendous willpower. And I did find these books. I paid a lot of money for them. I read them. I was then so blown away by my knowledge now that I wanted to share it. I found out at my church nobody had these books and wanted to know them. I made Xerox copies. People paid my Xerox copies. And from there, I went into another orbit, but it all had to do with bringing the voice out and bringing all these unknown things that nobody seemed to know anymore about, and that's why it was called Forgotten Genocides.
How long did you take putting it all together?
Oh, I didn't measure the time, but if I had to give it from beginning to end, I would say easily 25 years later. But it was an involvement, and people were encouraging me. I was having people writing to me from places that I didn't even know existed, as far as Australia, Japan, Germany, etc., asking me to please put them and their friends on their email list.
Well, it's obvious that the book played a critical role in your persona as a Greek. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how important it is to be Greek for you. What is memorable and important to you about being Greek?
Okay, I'll be very happy to. Actually, the book happened along the way because I had all this information, and therefore I created the book. But my persona as a Greek is, I was always in school. The kids that were Greek in class, where there was Connie Tsutsus, I remember her name even. Anytime the teacher said something about the Greeks, she would raise her hands like this, like a prize fighter, and we would all do it the same thing with her, and it was delightful. That's how my Greekness, but then I also went to Greek school, and my mother spoke Greek, of course, And this wonderful spiritual father spoke Greek. And I met him at my father's cemetery. And the first time, it was on Old Souls Day, την ημέρα των ψυχών, as the Greeks would say. And that day, the priests were there, and my mother would give me a quarter and say, please, Sophia, get that priest to come over and bless your daddy's grave. And then Papuli, who I later called Papuli, Reverend Nikandros, when I brought him over, he blessed my father's grave, and he refused the quarter I was going to hand him. He quoted something from the Bible. I don't know how to say it, but basically he said, I don't take money from widows and orphans. And that's how my life started, but I was always very happy to be Greek.
Well,
oh, and I grew up in New York City, and that was the mecca for Greeks. The grocery stores were Greek. The pastry shop was Greek. My church was close by was Greek, and it was there.
So tell us about how you spend your days now as a Greek American. You've transitioned from New York to Philadelphia. You're part of the St. George community. You live here in Center City, Philadelphia. Your hands are still in the arts?
Yes, oh yeah. I don't sculpt anymore, but if I were sculpting again, I definitely am more than ready to get a big studio and make my pieces very large. But if I were doing it again, I have some pieces that are futuristic furniture pieces that I'd love to see and created in that realm. And maybe someday, who knows, if I live long enough, maybe that'll happen. New York, Philadelphia, I love Philadelphia because there's so much history that abounds every step of the way. Walking over to the church was historic for me. I passed the first hospital in the United States. Every day I do that. That's very exciting to me. I came to this church that used to be an Episcopalian church. I believe it was, and I did my research, I forgot now, but there was a man who was the dean of church architecture who but who designed this church. And he was buried in the basement of this church. So history is very much part of my soul as well. And whenever I see people, I tell them, if I know that they're outsiders, I always make a point of pointing things out to them about the city. And I live in a house that's 200 years old.
And you cook Greek food, I'm assuming?
Oh, yes. But I'm very international. I used to do, I'm not as cuisine-oriented now because I'm too busy, but I cook all kinds of cuisine, Japanese, Korean, so on, and of course Greek.
Is there anything else related to your Greek experience that I should have asked you about?
Well, the one that I would love to tell you about that touches my soul is when I went to Greece. And my aunt knew that I was there, and she said, Sophia, are you ready to go see your mother's? She was from the same village, by the way, my father's sister. Would you like to see the village where we grew up? And I said, absolutely. So, okay, I'll make sure I take you. So she got her driver, and we went to the island of Evia, and we went to the village of Virevmata. And we went into my father's house where he grew up. My mother's house was down a few a few buildings away. But I also saw that. But before that happened, I said to her, Thea Sasa was Anastasia, but Sasa for short. Thea Sasa, please don't tell anybody I'm here. I want to apolafsi to χωριό μόνιμο. I want to enjoy this village on my own. So she said, okay. So I left the house and walked down the road a bit, and I met this lady walking down the street, and it was a touching experience. She had 2 pails full of sika, figs. My mother used to say, if I ever go to Greece, it's going to be during fig time, and here they were. And so I said, hello, kalimera. She said, kalimera. She said, would you like one? I said, absolutely. So she gives me 2, and I'm starting to eat them. And then she asks me the question that defines my life. Pionuni ise? Whose are you? She didn't say, who are you? Whose are you? I can cry now thinking about it. And I said to her, I am the daughter of Sofia Kontogeorge, and she didn't remember him. He had already left the village much earlier to go to Paris to study French and do what he wanted to do with his studies to begin with. He was a brilliant man, and I'm very proud of that. And handsome, too. And anyway, then I said my mother's name. She knew my mother. Oh, I used to play with your mom. And she described that. But then she said, do you know your mother sewing used to sing throughout all the villages? Who would think of sewing singing? But if you knew my mother's sewing, you could say that. But that somebody else said it was remarkable. I'll never forget that day.
What's the most important thing to you about being Greek, would you say?
That's a good question. That I come from a peoples that is ancient, who have contributed so much to civilization, and we live amongst, even our architecture is from there to here. Our 60% of our English language is Greek-based. I don't know, a lot of people don't know that. And then also a love of family. I think other people have it, but it's so normal for us. And I love the way we talk to each other. If we like each other, we don't just have a name. My name is Sophia, but my name can be Sofula, that's a sweeter Sophia, or it can be Sofitsa. And by the way, my little grandbaby, less than a month old, her name now is Sophia.
And how would you like to be remembered?
For all the works that I've done, because I've done a lot of works. I've made a better place for this world to be here in many different ways. And even here, even in our city, I've done a lot of work. Even a mailbox on one of the corners, which is not a major event, but I even got a mailbox on the corner. And but the book, I think, would be I think I'll reach a lot of people, and hopefully maybe the word forgotten genocides will be eliminated and it'll be called the remembered genocides, or the unforgotten genocides.
Any last thoughts?
I hope to live to be at least my mother's age when she passed away. She passed away at 103. And her mind was as sharp as a tack even then, because by then I'll have done more work and finished the things that I still have loose ends about.
One final question. There was your birth, there was a small story about that you mentioned earlier. I think it's just fantastic, and I'd love to hear that story.
Okay. Well, my mother was considering having a baby. And she felt it was time for her to have a baby, but she wanted to have a boy. So she went to a gypsy fortune teller. So I owe my life to a gypsy fortune teller, because she asked the fortune teller what she had. At that time, my mother wanted a boy because she felt boys had a better life. And back then, girls didn't have as good a life. She was a girl herself, so she came from that experience. So she didn't have as good a life, and she wanted the boy to have a better life. And that's it. I became, but what happened is I was born, and the gypsy fortune teller was wrong, but my mother was still always very happy about me being born, and I'm happy for that.
Would you like to end with a poem?
Oh, I wasn't thinking about that.
Why don't you pick one out?
Oh, I have so many, and I have another batch of them, but I'll do.
Tell us first which one you'd like to read and why.
Well, I have about 13 of mine here, and I'll pick a short one. But what I did do, I want you to know, is because it is a Forgotten Genocides book, I didn't think it was fair just to speak about the Greeks and the Armenians and the Assyrians. I have poems about the Native Americans, I have other ethnicities represented.
Anyone you want, pick out the one.
Well, I want to pick a short one. And I have one for the gypsies, too.
Why don't you end with that?
All right, it's a little longer, though. Is that all right?
It's okay.
I call it Who Speaks for Our People? Is it the jagged barbed wire glistening in the night, marking our new residence? Is it the barking dogs and their masters' clicking heels that signal our new end home? Away from free spirit of way of life? Why, God? We must go now to Auschwitz. You see, a lot of people don't know that the gypsies were part of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. It wasn't just the Jews, it was the Roma gypsies and many others. This one is about them, of course. We must now go to Auschwitz, our new home, where the super race will pluck our gypsy gold. And their doctors will run deviant tests on us before we die. Do not forget the mass murders of our gypsy people. Our old way of life will not die. Pulka, our adopted father, would say, too often the courage about dying is cowardice about living. So grab your tambourines, let's dance around the roaring campfires. The Nazis did not smother our spirit. Come, Rachko, let's make more babies and poems too. Let's live.
Wonderful. Thanks for talking with us.
Thank you, and more thank yous forever. Amen.